They rejected the single mother at the interview. She left with her head bowed, took her son's hand, and went to wait for the bus. The millionaire was nearby, his car stuck in traffic, and he saw them. He stopped, watched for a moment, and something about that scene between mother and son made him make a decision. And what he did changed both their lives forever. The woman from the interview had a way of smiling that didn't reach her eyes, and it was by this smile that Amina understood, even before hearing a word, that she wasn't going to get the job. She already knew that smile. She had seen it across other counters, in other small rooms with air conditioning that was always too strong, always accompanied by the same gentle tone used to wrap up a refusal. Even so, she sat with her back straight, her hands in her lap, waiting, because giving up before the last sentence would be giving up too soon. And Amina had learned not to give up early. "We see here that you have a young son," the woman said, flipping through the form without much hurry. 6 years old, isn't it? 6, Amina confirmed. "But he's in school in the morning, and the vacancy is for the afternoon, and sometimes it runs into the night when there's an event in the building." The woman made a sympathetic face, the kind that apologizes for something the person has no intention of changing. "And you've put here that you don't have a permanent person to leave him with, only a neighbor from time to time. My neighbor helps a lot, and my mother, when she can." "When she can." The woman repeated the two words slowly, as if balancing one domino on top of another. "The thing is, we need someone who won't be absent, you understand? With a small child and no reliable childcare, absences happen a lot. It's not you, it's the situation. We've been through this with other employees and the arrangement doesn't work out." Amina opened her mouth to say that she wasn't one to miss work, that in her previous 3 years of employment she had been absent twice, and one of those was because Samir, had been admitted to the hospital with bronchiolitis, but she held back. Talking too much after you've already heard a no only turns the no into an embarrassment, and she wasn't going to give that satisfaction to anyone, not even herself. So, she just nodded, picked up her bag from the floor, and said thank you. A genuine thank you, without irony, because the woman with the cold smile wasn't to blame for anything. She was just another person following a rule written by someone she would never meet. Amina knew how to distinguish the messenger from the message. She stood up, shook the offered hand, and walked out of the room with the firm stride of someone who doesn't want others in the reception to notice she's just had another door slammed in her face. It was only in the lift, alone, with the mirror reflecting her tired face and the strands of hair the Lagos humidity had loosened from her scarf, that she let her shoulders slump a little. Just a little. She took a deep breath, counted to 3, as she always did, and when the doors opened on the ground floor, she was whole again, or at least she looked it. The building's lobby was made of light marble with a high ceiling, the kind of place where the echo of your own footsteps makes you walk faster so as not to disturb the quiet. Outside, the midday sun beat down hard on the pavement, and the city carried on with its usual noise. The blare of horns, the hiss of BRT buses, people walking quickly with earphones in. Amina walked through the glass doors and felt the heat hit her face like a warm slap. Samir was sitting on a low bench near the security desk, just inside, where the security guard had let him wait, because small Pekin cannot stay on the pavement alone, madam. As soon as he saw her, the boy jumped off the bench and came running, his Spider-Man backpack bouncing on his back, and Amina opened her arms by reflex, even though she was tired, even though she was defeated, because for her son, she always had open arms. "Did it go well, Mummy?" There was the question she had been dreading since she entered that building, asked with the absolute naturalness of a 6-year-old who still believes that when Mummy tries hard, things work out. Amina crouched down to his level, adjusted the strap of the backpack that had slipped from his small shoulder, and thought for a moment about lying, about saying yes, they liked her, that she just had to wait for their call. It would be easier. But she never lied to Samir, because life would lie to him enough when he grew up, and she wanted his mother, at least, to be a place where the truth lived. "Not yet, my love," she said, and smiled a smile that was genuine because it was for him. "This one didn't work out, but there are more places in the world than you can imagine. We'll try another one." Samir made a face, more of solidarity than disappointment, because in his head, his mother's problem was his mother's problem, and he trusted her to solve it, just like she solved everything. "Are we taking the bus home?" "Yes, the Surulere bus. Come on, give me your hand." They walked out to the pavement together, his small hand in hers, and walked to the bus stop right in front of the building, across a wide lane where cars passed in a dense, impatient stream. The stop was one of the modern ones, glass and metal, with a route map pasted on one side and a hard-backed bench where two other people were already waiting. A young woman with a backpack and an older man in a rumpled shirt. Amina checked the electronic sign. The bus was due in 11 minutes. She mentally calculated the money she had in her purse, saw that it was enough for both their fares with a little left over for a gege bread in the evening, and sat on the edge of the bench with Samir tucked into the crook of her arm. The boy started talking about a cartoon he had seen at his grandmother's house, a long, rambling story about a robot that turned into a lorry. And Amina listened with that half attention that mothers learn to give, responding with "Ihan" and then, at the right moments, while the other half of her mind was doing sums. Sums for the rent due in 20 days, sums for the cooking gas that was running out, sums for how many more interviews she could afford to travel to by bus before the money got so tight that even that wouldn't be possible. She didn't let any of it show on her face. She had trained her face her whole life not to betray what was going on inside, especially not in front of her son. And at that bus stop, under the midday sun, she was just any mother waiting for a ride with her boy. Just like thousands of others in the city, as invisible as only the poor can be in the midst of so many people. Except that on that day, by a chance that had nothing magical about it, she wasn't completely invisible. Across the road, in front of the same marble building Amina had just left, a black SUV was stopped. Not parked, but stopped because the traffic at that hour lurched forward and stopped every few meters, held up by the traffic lights ahead. It was a large Lexus with tinted windows, the kind of car other drivers glance at, trying to guess which big man was inside. In the back seat, his suit jacket already taken off and folded on the seat beside him, his phone in his hand, but his eyes far from the screen, sat Ademola Williams. He had spent the entire morning in a meeting on the 8th floor of that building, a long, boring meeting about figures he already knew by heart, and he felt that specific exhaustion of someone who works too much and sleeps too little, an exhaustion that no amount of coffee could fix anymore. He was looking at the street without really seeing it, the way you look when your mind is elsewhere. And it was like that, without looking for anything, that his eyes fell on the bus stop across the road. It wasn't the woman he saw first, it was the boy. The boy's gesture, more precisely, the way the child was gesticulating, telling a story, his little arms spreading wide to show the size of something imaginary, and the mother laughing lightly, a laugh Ademola couldn't hear from there, but which he could see in the way her shoulders relaxed for a second. There was something about that scene that held him, and it took him a moment to understand what it was, the contrast. A woman who was clearly exhausted. You could see it in her posture, her slightly disheveled headscarf, her simple clothes, and the way she held her bag close to her body, like someone guarding the only thing they have. And yet, for her son, she had found a laugh. She was there, on what was probably the worst kind of day, giving the boy the whole version of herself while saving the rest for later, for when no one was watching. Ademola knew nothing about that woman. He didn't know her name, didn't know she had just left his building, didn't know that his company had rejected her less than 20 minutes ago. There was no recognition, no destiny, nothing but a tired man in an expensive car, looking out the window and being unexpectedly captivated by a small, ordinary scene that most people would go their whole lives without noticing. The car moved a few meters and stopped again. He kept watching. The boy had rested his head on his mother's arm, and she was stroking his hair with her hand, distracted, her eyes already searching for the bus at the end of the street. "Sir, Mr. Ademola," the driver's voice came from the front. "The traffic will clear now. Do you still want to stop at Ikoyi, or should we go straight to the office?" Ademola didn't answer immediately. The light ahead turned green. The line of cars began to move, and his SUV glided away from the stop, taking with it the last image of the woman getting up with the boy by the hand, as their bus finally appeared around the corner. He turned his head to follow them through the rear window for as long as he could, without really knowing why, and then leaned back against the seat, frowning at his own reaction. It wasn't like him to notice strangers. The city was full of people with difficult lives written on their faces, and he had long ago learned not to let it in, because if he did, he wouldn't be able to run the businesses he ran. But for some reason, that scene didn't leave with the car. It stayed. "The office," he said finally, and turned his eyes back to his phone without reading a single line of what was on the screen. Ademola's office was on the top floor of a building his own company had built, and from the window, you could see half the city spread out below. The rooftops, the flyovers, the river of cars that was already thickening for the evening rush. He spent the rest of the day as he spent all the others, in meeting after meeting, signing papers, listening to reports, making decisions that moved sums of money most people would never see in their entire lives. He was good at what he did. He had built it all from the ground up with an almost cruel self-discipline. And for years, work had been the only thing that filled his days in a way that made sense. But that afternoon, between one document and another, the image of the bus stop returned. The tired woman laughing for her son. He would push the thought away, and it would come back, stubborn, like a song that gets stuck in your head without asking permission. Around 6 p.m., as the floor began to empty, he called for Ifeoma, the assistant who had worked with him for 7 years and who knew the company's workings almost as well as he did. Ifeoma was a practical, middle-aged woman who wasn't impressed by anything and said what she thought, a rare quality, in a place where almost everyone was afraid to contradict the chairman. Ifeoma, that meeting this morning, at the Adeola Odeku building, he spun a pen between his fingers, looking for a way to make the question sound natural. What exactly happens there? It's not just the administrative side, is it? It's the shared services building, she replied, without looking up from the tablet where she was checking his schedule. That's where HR is, central purchasing, and the department that hires outsourced staff. Cleaners, security, caterers, that sort of thing. Why? Outsourced. He nodded slowly. So there were interviews there today for those positions. Every day. It's a revolving door. People come and go a lot in those roles. Now Ifeoma looked up, with an expression that suggested she had sensed something unusual. Sir, are you asking about a specific vacancy? Ademola hesitated, said aloud. What he wanted to ask sounded absurd, almost embarrassing, that he had seen a woman at a bus stop and couldn't stop thinking about her, and that a stubborn part of his mind wanted to know if, by any chance, she had been in his building that morning. It wasn't his style to act on impulse, and certainly not on an impulse as illogical as this one. But he was a man who had learned over time to trust his own instincts, because they almost always pointed to something that reason hadn't yet caught up with. Send me the list of interviews from today, he said. All of them, for the whole building. Ifeoma frowned, but asked nothing. It was part of her job not to ask when the chairman used that tone. Half an hour later, a document appeared on Ademola's computer. A simple spreadsheet with the names of all the candidates interviewed that day, the position they applied for, and the decision in each case. Approved, under review, or rejected. He ran his eyes down the list, unhurried, not sure what he was looking for, since he didn't have her name. He had nothing but a face seen from a distance through 2 panes of glass and a lane of cars. It was a search without a key, and he was almost convinced it was foolish when he stopped at a line near the bottom. There was a comments column that the interviewers usually left blank or filled with bureaucratic abbreviations. But on one of the lines, for the position of General Services Assistant, afternoon shift, someone had written in full, qualified candidate, good experience, good references, rejected due to unavailability, young child with no fixed support network, high risk of absenteeism. The name next to it was Amina Bello, 29 years old. Ademola read it twice. There was no way to be sure it was her. The city was huge. Single mothers with young children looking for work were in their hundreds, and that comment could apply to any of them. But something about the precision of that sentence, the cold way a person had been summarized and dismissed for a circumstance that wasn't her fault, gripped Ademola in a way he didn't expect. He had seen the woman at the bus stop hold her son's hand. He had seen the exhaustion in her, and the laugh she still managed. And now he was reading in a document from his own company that a woman had been rejected, not because she couldn't do the job, but precisely because she had a child to care for. It was possible they were 2 different people, but inside him, without any proof, a strange certainty formed that they were not. He leaned back in his chair and looked out at the city darkening outside. The question forming in his mind wasn't about the woman, or at least he preferred to believe it wasn't. It was about the criteria. Rejected due to unavailability. Young child. Was that a policy of his company, written and applied by people he himself had hired? And it was, when he stopped to think about it, deeply unfair. It wasn't about competence. It was about punishing a person for having a difficult life, for not having the money to pay for childcare while she went to earn money to support her child. A vicious circle created by poverty, one that only those inside it truly understand. Ademola had never been inside such a circle. He came from a comfortable family, not luxurious, but he had never experienced the kind of hardship that makes a person count their naira notes for a bus fare, and perhaps that was why that dry sentence in the report bothered him so much. It was the first time in a long while that he had seen so clearly the human cost of a rule his own company applied without a second thought. The next day, he arrived earlier than usual. He summoned the head of the outsourced hiring department, a man named Mr. Adebayo, who came up to the executive floor visibly nervous, because it wasn't every day the group chairman called someone of his level for a face-to-face chat. Mr. Adebayo was competent and not a bad person. He was just someone who did his job the way it had always been done, following criteria that no one questioned because they worked out in the numbers. Mr. Adebayo, sit down. Ademola pointed to the chair across his desk. I want to understand something about your hiring process. Yesterday, there was a candidate for General Services Assistant, an Amina Bello, who was rejected. The comment says it was because of her young child. Is this a rule, Mr. Adebayo swallowed hard, trying to guess if he was in trouble. Well, it's not a written rule, sir, but it is a criterion. We've learned from experience that candidates with young children and no one to leave them with end up being absent a lot. And in these roles, absenteeism is a serious problem because the cleaning and catering can't stop, so we tend to avoid it. It's nothing personal, just years of experience. Years of experience. Ademola repeated it tonelessly, like someone examining a specimen. And how many of these candidates you reject for this reason would actually have been absent? Do you have that number, or is it just an impression? Mr. Adebayo opened his mouth and closed it again. He didn't have the number. Nobody did. It was one of those truths the company had repeated for so long that no one remembered to check if it was actually true. We don't have that exact data, sir, he admitted. So you are rejecting qualified people based on a hunch. Ademola didn't say it with anger. He said it slowly, almost thoughtfully. And perhaps for that very reason, Mr. Adebayo felt more uncomfortable than if he had been shouted at. This woman, Amina. Were her references good? Mr. Adebayo consulted the tablet he had brought, looking for her file. Very good, actually. Worked for 3 years at a residential estate. The estate manager gave an excellent reference. Said she was one of the best they ever had. Very few absences in her entire time there. She left because the estate changed management companies and downsized their staff. He looked up, beginning to understand where the conversation was heading. On paper, she is an excellent candidate, sir. We rejected her solely on the issue of the child. Ademola nodded and remained silent for a while, spinning the pen between his fingers again, looking at the file Mr. Adebayo had turned on the desk for him to see. There was the name, the address in a distant part of Surulere, the phone number, the age, and that one line that summarized an entire injustice in a few words. He didn't know yet what he was going to do about it. He only knew he couldn't leave it as it was. Not because he was a saint he didn't see himself as one, but because he had seen the woman at the bus stop with his own eyes. And now it was impossible for him to treat that name on the paper as just another name, discarded by a rule that wasn't even a real rule. Mr. Adebayo, he said finally, call her back. The man blinked, not quite understanding. How do you mean, sir? For another interview. To be hired, if her references are as good as you say, she is more than qualified for the job. The issue of the child, we will solve that another way, not by discarding the person. He pushed the file back towards Mr. Adebayo. And I want this young child business to stop being a criterion for rejection, starting today. If someone is absent too much, we deal with the person who is absent, but no one else will be turned away from here for having a child to raise. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Crystal clear. Mr. Adebayo was already getting up, relieved it wasn't the reprimand he had feared, and still a bit stunned by the turn of events. I'll call her today. Call her, and Mr. Adebayo. Ademola stopped him at the door. Don't mention my name. She doesn't need to know this conversation happened. Treat it as a normal review of your department's decision. Understood? Understood, sir. When the man left, Ademola turned to the window and looked out at the city for a long time, not quite sure what he had just done, or why. He had given a stranger a job she didn't even know she was losing because of him, and changed an entire company policy because of a 10-second scene viewed from inside a car. It wasn't the kind of thing he did, and yet, for the first time in many months, he felt something akin to a clean satisfaction. The kind that doesn't come from closing a good deal, but from fixing something that was broken, even if it was just a small thing. The call came late the next afternoon, when Amina had almost crossed that company off her list of possibilities. She was in the kitchen of her small flat, warming up leftover rice from lunch to make dinner, while Samir sat on the living room floor, assembling and disassembling the same toy car as always. When her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, showing an unknown number, she looked at the screen with the suspicion that life teaches the poor. Because an unknown number could just as easily be good news as it could be, almost always, a bill collector. She wiped her hand on a cloth and answered with a guarded voice, ready to hang up if it was another loan she hadn't asked for. Hello, Am I speaking with Mrs. Amina Bello? A male voice asked from the other end, formal but polite. This is she. This is Mr. Adebayo, from the hiring department at the Williams Group. You had an interview with us the day before yesterday for the General Services Assistant position, you remember? Amina's heart gave a little leap, more of caution than hope, because she had learned not to let hope run too far ahead. I remember, but I was told I didn't get the position. Yes. Well, that's what I'm calling about. We reviewed the decision here internally, took a closer look at your references, which, by the way, are excellent, and we came to the conclusion that it was a mistake to reject you. So, if you are still interested, the job is yours. Permanent position, with full benefits, exactly as stated in the advert. Amina stood frozen with the phone to her ear, the dishcloth still in her other hand, not responding for a second too long because she wasn't expecting it, and it took a moment to believe it. Things like this didn't usually happen to her. A job that said no rarely called back to say yes, and when it did, there was usually a catch, a scheme, a strange condition. She was immediately suspicious, out of survival instinct. What do you mean? You reviewed the decision? She asked carefully. You said it was because of my son, that I would be absent. Yes. And we realized that wasn't a fair reason. Frankly, you have the qualifications, you have good references, and as for the hours, we can accommodate that. The afternoon shift is fixed, from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., and on the days with events, which are few, and with advance notice, we'll handle it case by case. No sudden demands will be placed on you. Mr. Adebayo spoke with an assurance that left no room for suspicion. If you accept, you can start on Monday. Just bring the documents, which I will list in a text message. Amina looked at Samir on the living room floor, at the toy car in his hands, at the cramped flat she still didn't know how she would continue to pay for, and she felt something rise in her chest that she hadn't allowed to rise in a long time. Relief. A huge, almost dangerous relief. Because she knew that too much relief in a life like hers was the kind of thing that left you unprepared. But it was a real job, a permanent job, with hours that fit around Samir's school, with a steady salary coming in every month. She didn't know what had changed the minds of those people, and at that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that there was only one answer she needed to give. I accept, she said, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. Monday, I'll be there. Thank you so much, really. When she hung up, she stood for a moment in the middle of the kitchen, just breathing. Then she went to the living room, sat on the floor beside her son, took the car from his hand, and made the toy drive up the boy's leg, which made him laugh. She didn't tell him the news right away. She savored it first in silence, because there are good things you need to hold on to for a moment before sharing, just to be sure they're real. Samir, she said finally, remember that place Mummy went to the day before yesterday? The big building? The one that didn't work out? Well, it worked out now. Mummy is going to work there. Samir broke into a smile and hugged her neck, not fully understanding the magnitude of what it meant, but understanding the most important thing, the relief on his mother's face. And Amina hugged her son back, tightly, and over his small shoulder, she let 2 tears well up in her eyes without anyone seeing, because he was the only audience before whom she sometimes allowed herself to feel the weight of all that she carried. Monday arrived, and Amina was at the Adeola Odeku building at 12:30 p.m., half an hour early, because arriving early on the first day was a rule she followed strictly. She dropped Samir off at school in the morning with a big kiss and a promise to pick him up at 5:30. She arranged with her neighbor, Mama Funke, to look after the boy on days when she might be late, and she took the bus with the good, nervous feeling of a new beginning. She was met by a supervisor named Mrs. Obi, a woman in her 40s, the kind who has seen many people come and go and therefore treats newcomers with a mix of firmness and patience. Mrs. Obi gave her the uniform and a name tag. She explained the hours, the areas of responsibility, the cleaning products, the do's and don'ts. Amina listened to everything attentively, making mental notes, asking the right questions like someone who truly needs the job and doesn't want to make any mistakes. The Adeola Odeku building housed the administrative services, simpler than the main headquarters, but still large, with several floors of offices, meeting rooms, and a kitchenette on each floor. Amina's job was to keep everything clean and stocked during the afternoon, and she got into the rhythm quickly, because it wasn't the kind of work that intimidated her. She knew how to clean, and she did it well, with a thoroughness that came not from obligation but from her own way of approaching work. If it was to be done, it should be done well, period. In the first few days, she hardly spoke to anyone besides Mrs. Obi and the other cleaning staff, a group of women, mostly older than her, who welcomed her with the naturalness of those who recognize one of their own. In the staff room, during their short breaks, they talked about life, their children, their husbands, Nollywood movies. And Amina gradually opened up, finding a kind of easy, undemanding companionship there that felt good. She had no idea who the owner of the corporate group she worked for was. She knew the name Williams because it was on her ID card and uniform. But to her, Williams was just the company's name, a word painted on the reception wall, a logo. The man behind the name was an abstraction, someone who existed on a high floor of another building, in a world that didn't touch hers at any point. And that was exactly as Ademola had planned. He had given orders for his name not to be mentioned. He had treated the hiring as a routine administrative review, and so Amina started that job without the slightest suspicion that she owed her position to a man who had seen her once, from a distance, at a bus stop. Their first meeting happened in her second week, and it happened by chance, the way such things happen in real life, without a soundtrack or slow motion. Ademola had gone to the Adeola Odeku building for a meeting with the administrative staff, something he did from time to time, and in the middle of the afternoon, he went down to get a coffee from the kitchenette on the 5th floor because the machine on his floor was broken and he didn't want to wait. It was there, in the small kitchenette with a table and 2 chairs, that he came face to face with a member of the cleaning staff, restocking the sugar and disposable cups, her back to the door, her hair neatly covered by a scarf, wearing the grey uniform of the outsourced company. He didn't recognize her at first, just said, "Excuse me," to get to the coffee machine. With the distracted politeness of someone who doesn't pay much attention to the cleaning staff, an automatic habit he didn't even realize he had. "Olga, you can pass," Amina said, stepping aside to make space, without looking up much, because it was also automatic for her not to stare at the executives in suits who moved through the building. It was the voice that made Ademola stop, or not the voice exactly, but something in the whole of it, the way it sparked a memory in his head that took him a second to place. He looked again, this time really looked, and saw her face in profile, and the memory clicked. It was her, the woman from the bus stop. The same one he had seen laughing for her son on her worst day, the same one whose name he had read in a report, and because of whom he had changed an entire company policy. She was there, in the 5th floor kitchenette, in uniform, restocking the sugar, with no idea that the man she had just made way for was the reason she was there. Ademola felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mix of recognition and awkwardness, because suddenly the whole situation seemed to have a different weight. He knew things about her that she didn't know he knew. He knew she had a 6-year-old son, he knew about the bus stop, he knew she had been rejected and rehired because of his intervention. She knew nothing. She looked at him only as she looked at any other man in a suit, with that respectful and slightly defensive distance of someone who has learned not to get involved in the world of the bosses. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. The right thing, the most sensible thing, would be to get his coffee and leave, to let things be, to maintain the distance he himself had created. But there was a curiosity in him that was stronger than common sense. The curiosity to know who the woman really was behind that 10-second scene that had stuck with him. "Thank you," he said, pressing the button on the machine, and then, without planning to, he let it slip. "You're new here, aren't you? I haven't seen you before." Amina, who was about to leave with her box of supplies, stopped and answered politely, suspecting nothing. "Yes, sir, I started last week." And because he seemed to be waiting for something more, she added simply, "Amina, from the afternoon cleaning crew." "Amina," he repeated, and the name sounded different, spoken aloud, real, connected to a face, and no longer to a line in a report. "Ademola, it's a pleasure." She nodded with a polite half-smile, not understanding why this executive was introducing himself to the cleaner, something men in suits didn't usually do, but also not giving it much importance, because she had work to finish. She excused herself with a "good day, sir," and left the kitchenette with her box, leaving Ademola standing there with his coffee in hand, and the new, uncomfortable feeling of being faced with something he himself had started, without knowing where it would lead. After that first encounter in the kitchenette, Ademola started showing up at the Adeola Odeku building, with a frequency that did not go unnoticed by Ifeoma, his assistant, though she said nothing. He made up reasons. Meetings that could very well have been held via video call, follow-up visits he used to delegate. And every time he went, he would end up going down to the 5th floor kitchenette at some point in the afternoon, always with the excuse of getting coffee. It wasn't a conscious plan, or at least he wouldn't admit to himself that it was. He told himself it was curiosity, the legitimate interest of an owner in getting to know the workings of his own buildings, that it was anything but what it really was, something he couldn't yet name. Amina noticed, of course. A woman who works cleaning other people's floors learns to notice everything without appearing to notice. That's the useful side of invisibility. From within it, you can observe the world freely. She noticed that this executive, the one named Ademola who had introduced himself, appeared more often than other owners and directors usually did, and that when he appeared, he almost always exchanged a few words with her. At first, she found it strange. She was even suspicious of the kind of interest she knew well and knew how to repel with a polite coolness. It wouldn't be the first time a man in a position of power decided the cleaner was easy territory. But Ademola didn't act like that. There was no flattery in his conversations, no lingering looks or inappropriate comments. He just started conversations about trivial things, the weather, the busyness of the building, and once or twice, he asked something about her in a way that wasn't intrusive, just interested, like someone talking to a person, not a function. It was in one of these conversations, in her third week, that he asked about her son. Amina was collecting used cups from a meeting room that had just emptied, and Ademola, who was passing in the corridor, stopped at the door. "You have a son, don't you?" he asked, and immediately regretted it, because there was no way he could have known that without revealing that he knew more than he should. Amina stopped with the tray of cups in her hand and looked at him, a little surprised. "I do." "How do you know, sir?" Ademola quickly improvised with the naturalness of someone used to thinking under pressure. "Oh, I think I heard Mrs. Obi mention that you had just started and that you had a little boy." He shrugged, as if it were an unimportant detail. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be nosy." "No, not at all." Amina relaxed because the explanation made sense. Mrs. Obi knew her situation. It was natural that she would have mentioned it. "It's Samir. He's 6. He's in school in the morning, which is why I took the afternoon shift. It fits perfectly." And without realizing it, her face softened the way it always did when she spoke of her son, a gentle pride she couldn't hide even if she wanted to. "6 is a good age," Ademola said. "Full of energy, I imagine." "Ah, sir, you have no idea." Amina laughed, a short, genuine laugh. "He's a whirlwind. Asks questions all day, wants to know everything. He takes things apart to see how they work inside. Last week he dismantled the television remote and then looked at me with the most innocent face, as if the remote had taken itself apart." Ademola laughed too, and for a moment, the conversation was just that. Two adults talking about a child, without hierarchy, without the enormous distance that existed between the group chairman and the cleaning assistant. It was a small moment, the kind that don't seem important while they're happening, but that you later realize were where something began. Amina didn't know who she was talking to. She thought he was just a friendly and perhaps a bit lonely executive, the kind who likes to chat with the building staff. And Ademola, who knew exactly who he was talking to, felt with each of these conversations that the woman from the bus stop was ceasing to be a frozen image in his head and becoming a real person, with a son who dismantled remotes, with a weariness she carried, with a dignity that he found, without quite knowing why, admirable. The problem, and Ademola was beginning to realize this, was that the whole thing was built on an omission. He knew things that she didn't know he knew. He knew about the bus stop, about the rejected interview. He knew that she owed this job to his interference. Every polite conversation they had was, in a way, an unequal one, because he had a hidden piece of information in his pocket, and the more time passed, the more that information weighed on him. At first, it had seemed like the right thing to do, to keep his name out of it, to let her have the job without the awkwardness of knowing it was a favor from on high. But now, as he got to know the real Amina and something in him grew fond of this woman, the omission began to feel less like a kindness and more like a lie. He held onto it and didn't know what to do with it. Meanwhile, Amina's life was improving slowly, in the gradual, concrete way that life improves when a steady salary comes in every month. She managed to catch up on her rent. She bought a new pair of school shoes for Samir, whose big toe was poking through a hole in his old ones. She started buying the fruit the boy loved again, without having to calculate how many days it would last. They were small things, but it was precisely the small things that made the difference between living on the edge and living suffocated. And Amina felt, for the first time in a long time, that she could breathe. She wasn't rich. Far from it, she still counted every kobo. But the line between her and the abyss, which for months had been far too thin, now had some slack, and she knew who she owed it to. Or at least she thought she did. She owed it to her own effort, to the luck of a reviewed decision, to God, to life. She had no idea she owed it to a man in a suit, who came down to the 5th-floor kitchenette to drink a coffee he didn't even need to drink. In the 4th week, something happened that brought them closer in a different way. It was a Friday. The end of the workday was approaching, and Samir's school had called to say the boy had a fever and needed to be picked up. Mama Funke, the neighbor who was Amina's backup plan, had traveled to her village to visit her daughter. Amina's mother lived far away and didn't drive. Amina found herself in that tight spot every single mother knows. The bind of being stuck at work while your child needs you elsewhere, with no one in between to solve the problem. She went to Mrs. Obi, explained the situation with the embarrassment of someone who hates to ask for favors, and asked if she could leave early, offering to make up the hours later. Mrs. Obi, who was a mother herself and understood, said yes, no wahala, she could go. Amina left in a hurry, her heart tight as it always was when Samir got sick, and it was at that moment, as she was leaving the building, that she ran into Ademola, who was arriving for a late afternoon meeting. He saw at once that something was wrong, because her face, which he had already learned to read a little, was tense in a different way. "Amina, is everything all right?" he asked. "Yes." "Well, my son has a fever at school. I need to go and get him." She spoke quickly, already on her way out. No time for formalities. Mrs. Obi said I could go. "Excuse me, sir, are you taking the bus?" Ademola asked, and the question came out before he could think. "Yes, the Surulere bus." She barely stopped to answer. Her mind was already at the school, with her son, with the fever. The bus will take ages. Ademola made a decision in a second, the way he made all important decisions. "My car is right here. Let me give you a lift. It's much faster." Amina stopped and looked at him, torn between the urgency of getting to her son and the automatic suspicion of accepting a ride from a man she barely knew, especially someone in his position. All the caution life had taught her screamed at her to refuse, to take the bus as always, to owe nothing to anyone and, most importantly, not to put herself in a position of dependency. But Samir had a fever, every minute counted, and the bus really would take a long time. And there was a sincerity in Ademola's face that, even in her suspicion, she couldn't interpret as ill-intentioned. She hesitated, and the hesitation was almost a yes. "No need, sir, really. I don't want to be a bother. It's no bother at all." He was already signaling for his driver to bring the car around. "Your son is sick. That's what matters now. The meeting can wait. Let's go." And so it was, because of a fever and a rush, that Amina accepted something from this man for the first time, not knowing she had already been accepting much more from him than she could imagine. She got into the black SUV with tinted windows, the same one from which he had first seen her at the bus stop weeks before, though she couldn't have known that. She sat in the back seat, clutching her bag on her lap, tense, thanking him quietly, and gave the driver the address of the school. The car entered the late afternoon traffic, and during the journey, they barely spoke. She was focused on her worry for her son. He respected her silence, knowing this wasn't the time for conversation. But something had changed with that simple gesture. A line had been crossed, lightly, almost unintentionally, and neither of them yet knew where it would lead. The ride that late afternoon was the first of others. Not many, and never arranged, but from time to time, when their schedules coincided, and Ademola was in the building as Amina was leaving, he would offer to take her home, and she, after refusing the first few times on principle, began to accept when refusal no longer made sense. Samir had recovered from the fever in a few days. It was just a silly childhood virus. But the episode had left a new familiarity between the two adults, the kind of quiet intimacy that is born when one person sees another in a moment of genuine distress. During the rides, they would talk. Ademola would ask about the boy, and Amina, who at first answered sparingly, like someone unwilling to open up too much to her boss, gradually began to share stories about her son, the mischief he got into, the impossible questions he asked, his way of looking at the world. And Ademola would listen with an interest that wasn't feigned, laughing at the stories, making comments. And Amina began to realize that this man, despite all his money and position, was lonely in a way she recognized, because his loneliness, though of a different nature, had the same silence as hers. She began to like his company, not in a way she would admit, even to herself, because the gulf between their two worlds was too vast for her to allow herself to think of it as anything more than an unlikely friendship between a cleaner and a kind executive. But she liked it. She liked the conversations, the respectful way he treated her, the way he never made her feel less for being who she was. There were men who, when being kind to a poor woman, made sure she knew the size of the favor. Ademola did not. He treated Amina as an equal. And that, for a woman who spent her days being invisible, was a rare and valuable thing. What Amina didn't know, and what Ademola carried with a growing weight, was the truth about how she had gotten that job. With every conversation, every ride, every story of Samir she shared with him, the omission weighed more heavily. He had started it as a discreet gesture, a silent correction of an injustice, and now he found himself in an awkward position. He was building a relationship of trust with a woman who trusted him precisely because she didn't know that the foundation of it all was a hidden piece of information. Each day that passed without telling her made it harder to tell, and at the same time, made the lie bigger. He knew that sooner or later he would have to say something, and he dreaded that moment because he knew Amina well enough to know she was a proud woman, the kind who prefers a harsh truth to a kindness that hides something, and he couldn't predict how she would react to discovering that the job that had pulled her from the brink was not solely the fruit of her own effort, but of a favor from on high that she had never asked for. The truth came out, as hidden truths often do, at the worst possible moment, and in the clumsiest way. It was an ordinary afternoon in the fifth-floor kitchenette, where the two of them had fallen into the habit of exchanging a few words. Mrs. Obi, the supervisor, was also there, along with two other employees. The conversation was light, about nothing in particular. It was Mrs. Obi, with no ill intent, just making a comment, who let slip the information that changed everything. "You know, I still find it funny how you ended up here, Amina," Mrs. Obi said, stirring her coffee. "Because look, it's the only time I've ever seen a rejection overturned just like that. Mr. Adebayo told me, the order came from the top, you know? Someone in management ordered him to review your case and change the whole rule about having a young child. It was because of you that it changed. You don't even know how lucky you were." Amina stopped, cloth in hand. The sentence entered her slowly, and it took her a second to process what Mrs. Obi had said. The order had come from the top. Someone in management had ordered them to review her case. She hadn't gotten this job on her own merit, as she had always believed. Someone, some big man from up high, had intervened, and the instant that idea formed in her head, her eyes, by pure reflex, turned to Ademola, who was standing beside her with a cup in his hand, and who, at the moment Mrs. Obi spoke, had frozen, with an expression on his face that gave everything away. Nothing more was needed. Amina knew people well enough to read a face, and Ademola's face at that instant was the face of a man who had been caught. The silence that fell between them was short for the others, who didn't even notice, but for Amina and Ademola, it lasted a lifetime. She looked at him, he looked at her, and the understanding passed between them without a word. It was him, Ademola, the kind executive from the car rides, the chairman of the group. He was the person in management who had ordered the decision to be reviewed. It was he who had, for some reason she still didn't understand, pulled her name from the pile of the rejected and placed her in that job. Amina felt her face flush, a mixture of shame, anger, and a humiliation. She didn't quite know where it came from. She dropped the cloth, mumbled some excuse, and left the kitchenette faster than she should have, leaving behind Mrs. Obi, who was still talking, not understanding she had just detonated something. And Ademola, who saw her leave and knew instantly that the moment he had dreaded had arrived, and in the worst possible way. He found her minutes later in the service corridor, near the staircase, where Amina had gone to breathe, away from the eyes of others. She had her back to him, one hand on the wall, trying to control the storm raging inside her. When she heard his footsteps, she didn't turn. "Amina," he said, his voice low, cautious. "Let me explain. You're the owner," she said without turning, her voice more controlled than she felt inside. "You're the owner of all this, and you were the one who ordered them to hire me." "I was." She finally turned, and on her face there was no arrogance of someone offended out of vanity. There was the deeper pain of someone who discovers that something she had taken as her own achievement was, in fact, disguised charity. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do it? You didn't even know me." And there, Ademola found himself with a choice. He could invent a technical explanation, say it was a policy review, an administrative matter, and perhaps save the situation with a comfortable half-truth. But he was tired of the omission, tired of the weight of keeping it, and he knew Amina deserved the whole truth, however strange it might sound. So he told her. He told her about the bus stop, that he had seen her that day, without knowing who she was, sitting there with her son, and that the scene had stayed with him. He told her that later, by chance, he had discovered she was the rejected candidate, and that the reason for the rejection, having a young child, had bothered him to the point that he changed the rule and ordered her to be rehired. He told her everything, without embellishment, and at the end, he fell silent, waiting for her judgment. Amina listened to everything without interrupting, and as he spoke, her anger began to transform into something more complicated, because it wasn't what she had thought. In the first instant, she had imagined the worst. She had imagined it was the kind of favor that comes with a hidden price, that this man had some interest in her, and that the job was the bait. But the story he told wasn't that. It was the story of a man who had seen an injustice and decided to fix it, and who later, without planning it, had grown fond of the person he had helped. There was nothing sordid in it, and yet, Amina felt strange, uncomfortable, because the truth messed with the one thing she had always managed to keep standing, even in the worst poverty, the pride in everything she had achieved on her own. "You should have told me," she said finally, her voice choked but firm. "From the beginning, I've spent all these weeks thinking I had earned this myself. You understand? That it was my effort, my references, my work. That was important to me. It was the only thing I had. And now I find out it was because you felt sorry for me at a bus stop." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "I don't want pity, Mr. Ademola. I have never wanted anyone's pity." "It wasn't pity." Ademola took a step forward, and there was a sincere urgency in his voice. "Amina, look at me. It wasn't pity. What I saw at that bus stop wasn't a woman to be pitied. It was a woman who, on her worst day, still found a way to laugh for her son. That doesn't inspire pity. That inspires," he searched for the word, "respect. I didn't hire you because I felt sorry for you. I hired you because my company was being unfair to you, and that was my mistake, not yours. The references were yours. The work you do here, which everyone praises, is yours. I just removed a barrier that should never have been there. The merit is still all yours." Amina fell silent, looking at him, trying to decide if she believed him. His words made sense, and there was a sincerity in them she couldn't dismiss. But it was a lot to digest at once, and she needed time. She needed to get away. She needed to understand what she felt before letting him fix the situation with the smooth words that men in his position always had. "I need to go and get my son," she said, though there was still time. "Excuse me," and she left, leaving Ademola alone in the service corridor, not knowing if he had just fixed things or broken them for good. Amina spent the next few days mulling it all over, and it wasn't anger she was mulling, but confusion. She went to work, did her job with the same care as always, picked up Samir, took care of the house, and all the while, underneath the routine, her mind tried to arrange the pieces in a way that made sense. On one hand, there was her wounded pride, the discovery that the achievement she had claimed as her own had had a helping hand. On the other hand, the more she thought about it, the more she understood that Ademola was right about one thing. She did the work. The references were hers. What he had done wasn't to give her for free what she didn't deserve, but to remove an unjust barrier that prevented her from showing what was already hers. When she managed to see it without the fog of shame, it was different from charity. It was, in essence, justice. Ademola, for his part, kept his distance during those days, and it was the smartest thing he could have done. He didn't seek her out, didn't insist, didn't send messages. He gave her the space she needed, which, for a man accustomed to solving everything with quick action, was an exercise in patience he had never practiced. He was afraid, a real fear of having ruined the only good and true thing that had entered his life in a long time. Because, and now he could no longer deny it to himself, what he felt for Amina had ceased to be curiosity a long time ago. It was something bigger, the kind that scares you precisely because you don't choose to feel it. It was Amina who sought him out at the end of that week. She knocked on his office door in the main building, something a cleaning staff member never did, and Ifeoma, surprised, let her in. Ademola looked up from his computer and saw her there, in her uniform, her ID card on her chest, looking serious, and his heart clenched, because he didn't know if she had come to make peace or to say goodbye. "I've thought a lot," Amina said, without beating around the bush, standing before his desk, "these past few days. I came here because I need to tell you some things, and then you can tell me if it still makes sense for me to continue working here." "Please, sit," he said, but she remained standing, and he understood that this was something she needed to say on her feet. First, she took a breath. "I was hurt, and I won't pretend I wasn't. Not because you helped me, but because you hid it. Because I've spent my whole life learning not to owe anyone anything, to manage on my own, to earn every little thing with my own sweat. And when I found out there was something I hadn't earned on my own, I felt small. Not because of the help, but because of the lie on top of the help. I know, Ademola said quietly, "and I apologize for that. You are completely right. Let me finish." She raised her hand slightly, and he fell silent. "But I also thought about this. You could have done anything. You could have given me money at that bus stop, thrown a note out the car window and driven off, if it was pity. That's not what you did. You looked into why I was rejected, saw it was an injustice, and you fixed the injustice. And you didn't just fix it for me. You changed the rule for all the other mothers who would have gone through it after me." Her voice wavered slightly. "That isn't pity, Mr. Ademola. I thought a lot, and I came to this conclusion. Pity is giving a man a fish. You removed the wall they were building in front of the river. It's different." Ademola listened and felt something loosen in his chest, a knot that had been there for days. "It's different," he repeated. "Yes." Amina nodded. "And there's one more thing." She hesitated for the first time, and her firmness gave way to something more delicate. "These past few weeks, in the car, in our conversations, I started to enjoy talking to you. And when I found out who you were, do you know what my first fear was? It wasn't the job. It was thinking that all of that, the conversations, the way you treated me, was all out of pity. That you talked to me for the same reason you helped me, out of charity. And that hurt more than the issue of the job, because I had really liked those conversations." Ademola stood up then, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of her. Close, but not invading her space, in the same respectful way he had always treated her. "Amina," he said slowly, measuring each word, because he knew it was important to get it right. "None of that was out of pity. I don't go down to the 5th floor to drink bad machine coffee out of charity. I went down because I wanted to see you. Because our conversations were the best part of my day, at a time when my days hadn't had any good parts for a very long time. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, you stopped being the woman I had helped and became the person I wanted to see. And I hid the truth not out of charity, but for the opposite reason, because I was afraid that if you knew, you would leave, and I would lose that. It was selfishness, in the end. The selfishness of someone who didn't want to lose the only good thing he had found." They stood in silence, close to each other, in the middle of that large office, with a view of the entire city. And Amina, who had entered shielded, ready to say what she had to say and leave, felt her shield crack. Because what he was saying matched what she herself felt, and hadn't had the courage to name. It wasn't a cleaner and a millionaire. At that moment, it was just two lonely people who, by a mundane chance at a bus stop, had found something in each other that was missing. "I don't know how to do this," Amina said softly, and a shy smile fought with the seriousness on her face. "You're the owner of the company where I clean the floors. This isn't a story that ends well, Mr. Ademola. This is a story that causes gossip, that causes judgment, that makes people say I've hit the jackpot, that I've trapped a rich man, I have a son to raise. I can't afford to make a mistake." "Then we won't make a mistake," he said. "We'll do it slowly, the right way. No rush, no hiding, without you ceasing to be who you are. And if at any moment you feel this isn't what you want, you tell me, and I will respect it. And you will keep your job, which is yours by merit, and no one can take that away. But let me try, Amina. Not as a boss, but as a man. Let me show up, pick Samir up from school on a rainy day, sit at your table and eat rice and stew, if that's what you have. Let me be part of your lives in a real way, not from above." He paused, and his voice came out hoarser. "For a long time, I've had everything and had nothing. You and that boy are the first thing that has made me want to come home in years." Amina felt her eyes sting, and this time she didn't hold back. She let a single tear fall, and then she laughed at herself for crying in her boss's office, which was the kind of absurdity her life had been producing lately. "Slowly," she repeated, as if making both a demand and a concession. "Very slowly. And you'll have to win over Samir first, because that boy is as suspicious as his mother, and his opinion is worth more than mine." Ademola laughed, a relieved, broad laugh, the kind he hadn't laughed in a very long time. "I accept that challenge," he said. "What's his favorite cartoon? I need to prepare." And Amina laughed again. And in that laugh, the two of them sealed an agreement that was neither a promise nor an oath. It was just a door opening slowly, the way she had asked. The following months proved her caution right and her fears wrong at the same time. Ademola did everything slowly, the right way. He won over Samir with patience, not by buying the boy with expensive gifts, which was the mistake Amina had feared, but by winning him over with time and attention, learning about the cartoons, answering the impossible questions, teaching the boy to ride a bicycle on a sunny Sunday in a park, running behind the bike, holding the seat, both of them laughing. Amina kept her job because she insisted on it, and she accepted no special treatment No made-up position, nothing that would make her owe more than she already did. She was Amina, from the afternoon cleaning crew, and she was proud of it. And Ademola respected that pride because he had understood, right from the bus stop, that it was exactly that dignity that had drawn him to her. The gossip came, of course, as she had predicted, but it passed, as gossip does when it finds no scandal to feed on, only two people treating each other well. And anyone who spent time with them soon saw that there was no gold digger or boss's favor. There was a woman who had learned to trust again, slowly, and a man who had relearned what it felt like to want to come home. One night, many months later, the three of them now living together in a flat that was no mansion, chosen by Amina in a neighborhood she liked. Without luxuries she didn't want, Ademola woke up in the middle of the night to find her side of the bed empty. He got up and found Amina in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of water, looking out the window at the city lights below. He sat beside her without saying anything, and they stayed in a comfortable silence for a while. The kind of silence people who no longer need to fill every moment with words share. "You know what I was thinking?" Amina said finally, her eyes still on the window, "about that day at the bus stop. I was so at rock bottom that I didn't even see your car stop there. Didn't know anyone was watching me." She turned her face to him and smiled, a serene smile, with none of the old hurt. "Life is crazy, isn't it? The worst afternoon of my life turned out to be the one that changed everything. I left that building thinking I had lost again, and without knowing it, I had just gained you too." Ademola took her hand, which was resting on the table, that hand, rough from work, that he had learned to love exactly as it was. "We almost missed each other," he said. "If the traffic had moved, if my car had just driven past, if I had kept looking at my phone, as I always did, a 1-second difference, and we would have spent our whole lives not knowing the other existed. But it didn't." Amina squeezed his hand. "The car stopped, and you looked." "And I looked," he repeated, smiling. From the next room came a mumble from Samir, sleeping, dreaming aloud about some adventure with a robot that turned into a lorry, and they both laughed quietly so as not to wake the boy. Amina rested her head on Ademola's shoulder, there in the kitchen in the middle of the night, with nothing special happening. And it was precisely because nothing special was happening that the moment was the most special of all. Because it was life, real life, the small kind that is built slowly, one day after another, with no fairy tale, just two people who decided to stay. The worst afternoon had become the beginning of everything, and this time, the three of them knew to hold on to what life, almost by chance, had placed in their path.